Hello and welcome. The Palestinian-Israeli situation has gone from bad to worse in the past few days. After months of relative quiet, Hamas's military wing launched 8 rockets at Israel from Gaza on Tuesday in retaliation for Israel's killing of 9 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. And internally, the future of the National Unity Government, which took more than a year to form, was shaky after the resignation of Interior Minister Hanan Ashrawi. The position of the Interior Minister is particularly sensitive because he controls the security forces. Meanwhile, there's a lot of talk of an Arab peace plan, the US administration's peacemaking efforts, and the role of the European Union. Well, I'm joined by someone who's been a key player and observer of Middle East politics for decades. She's going to shed light on these issues. Dr. Hanan Ashrawi is a former peace negotiator and current elected member of the Palestinian Legislative Council. She also served as a Palestinian Minister of Higher Education and is the founder of the Palestinian Initiative for the Promotion of Global Dialogue and Democracy, MIFTA. Well, don't forget, we take your questions on this show and the numbers are at the bottom of your screen. Dr. Ashrawi, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you. Good to have you with us. Now, I have to start by asking, why is there this continuous breakdown in the relationship between the main factions, Hamas and Fatah? Why are they so constantly targeting each other?
Well, there's a situation of extreme polarization on the one hand. They are, of course, at the opposite ends of the political poles. They have different agendas politically and ideologically. Fatah has been at the forefront of national politics in Palestine, and Hamas is rather a newcomer, but it signals the rise of political Islam. So they do have opposing agendas, even though now they have a common interest not to allow this agenda to lead to confrontations and to lead to infighting. There's a power struggle, very clearly. And also there are old legacies. Sometimes you have scores to be settled. And this is what's happening at present, even though they are part of the same coalition government.
It seems there are so many people, who are already under economic duress and so on, who are caught in the middle here,
yes,
who seem to be suffering from this. Is there anyone trying to lead some kind of stop to the infighting at the street level, to stop what's happening on the streets to the average person?
Yeah, there have been attempts. Actually, the Mecca Agreement and the agreement to form the National Unity Government was one way of stopping the fighting and the sliding into a civil war. Unfortunately, as I said, there were leftovers, particularly the issue of revenge and the issue of tribalism. The situation is quite complex in Gaza in particular, because if there is no rule of law and due process, then people will resort to exacting vengeance in return for the killing of a relative and so on. And of course, the militias aren't all entirely subject to Hamas or Fatah. There are many militias that are affiliated with large families and clans, and these militias are armed and they are part of the infighting.
Well, Dr. Ashrawi, as you know, we take viewers' calls on the show. So we've got Mohammed on the line from Austria. Mohammed, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, first and foremost, I would like to say that I'm a big fan of Hanan Ashrawi. She's a great woman. I've seen her many times in America. Now, my question is that so much pressure is being put on the Hamas government. Do you think it's going to make them more popular in the Palestinian eyes, the people's eyes, since there's so much pressure by the American and the European Union? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, the more pressure there is on Hamas, the more the Palestinians will rally to its defense, because they don't like external intervention or external pressure. And if there is opposition for Hamas, then it has to be internal, authentic Palestinian opposition. The US and Israel cannot usurp the role of the opposition. It's true, if a certain faction is being targeted by Israel and by the West, then the people would rally to defend it. It's only natural. And at the same time, they would forgive it many of its sins or trespasses should it fail in terms of governance. Because of the boycott and the sanctions, it'll be seen as a victim, positioned as a victim, and therefore they will defend it.
I know it's interesting. After so much discussion of a unity government, and there was so much hope that something would move forward, of course, things don't seem to be any better. But it's interesting to note you tend to describe it as a coalition government, yes, rather than a unity government. Why?
I do, because I see it as a sort of convergence of interests, factional interests, rather than a real unity in terms of understanding what is needed to forge a unified agenda and to move ahead with common interests. I think there is a sort of tendency to divide the spoils, so to speak, and benefit and privilege, and it is quite factional in many ways. Fatah has its own interests in being part of the government again, and Hamas has its own interest to stay in power and therefore to share some of that power. And instead of depoliticizing the security and the civil service, they are sort of trying to divvy up the spoils and say how many people are for Hamas and how many for Fatah and how many in the security and how many ambassadors and how many governors. And this is not really a sign of real unity. It's probably more of a marriage of convenience.
Now, of course, the Interior Minister's post is a very significant one because of the control of the security forces.
Absolutely.
And, of course, Hani Kawesme, who had been given that position, just resigned. What significance do you see in that?
I think it's probably a mission impossible because the Interior Minister will be in between a rock and a hard place because he certainly has to contend with certain militias that have loyalties and that are politicized, even if they are security forces, like the executive force that is affiliated with Hamas, and then you have, for example, the preventive security that is affiliated with Fatah, and all these forces have been clearly politicized, and the Minister of Interior is going to have a hard time trying to control either side. So unless he or she is, but he in this case, is empowered genuinely, and unless the forces are depoliticized, and unless there is genuine reform in the security system as a whole, he's going to have a very hard time, and particularly given the fact that now there is, again, factional rivalry that has extended to the National Security Council, and Hamas is protesting the appointment of Mohammed Dahlan, for example.
Now, of course, that's going to leave the situation in a very difficult position, right? The Palestinian government's going to be left in a very difficult position now, especially as it tries to promote something in terms of talks with Israel. So, of course, it's difficult on two fronts: one internally and then one externally as well. In terms of the looking at the situation with Israel, it seems that again the ceasefire now, Hamas has basically said that's no longer the case. Where do you see that developing?
Now, Hamas sort of backed down. I think we heard some noises that the ceasefire is coming to an end or they're going to renege on it, but Ismail Haniyeh said, no, that's not true, because it'll be quite serious should Hamas renege on the ceasefire. Then it means that there are no holds barred. Then we're back again to military engagement, which would lead also to internal fighting and so on. No, the ceasefire, so to speak, or the quiet still holds. But as you said, yes, there are difficulties, some of them internal, some external. So long as there's a siege, and the siege is economic, it is political, and it is territorial. The Palestinians are going to be caught in the siege where living conditions are more difficult, where the Ministry of Finance will not be able to meet the wage bill, and so on. And this deprivation and sense of despair and need will reflect on internal stability. And at the same time, if there are no prospects for peace, if there is no viable, credible peace process, then that will make life also more difficult and will lead to greater despair.
But rockets are still being fired into Israel, so that obviously doesn't help the situation either.
Yeah. Well, that's not the norm, actually. That's the exception now. The norm is to have Israeli incursions. I mean, Israel is carrying out regularly incursions into the West Bank, in Nablus and Jenin and Tulkarem, particularly the north, as well as in Ramallah, and is killing Palestinians, I mean, on a daily basis and with impunity. So the thing is, Israel wants to have a free hand to do whatever it wants, and at the same time wants the Palestinians to adhere to a ceasefire or the quiet on their own. There are provocations, after all, and these have to be dealt with. If we are to delegitimize violence, we have to delegitimize it on all sides. You cannot give the occupation a free hand and then ask the people under occupation to lie down and die quietly. They're going to be provoked. So we need to work on this in context and in totality.
Let's bring in Varma from Switzerland with a question. Thanks for joining us, Varma. What would you like to ask?
Yeah, hi, it's Arun here. Dr. Shrawi. Hello.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, Dr. Shrawi. Dr. Shrawi, you know that recently Mr. Ilan Pape wrote a book on ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
Ben Gurion and so forth and so on. And now you know that he's gone to Exeter University.
Yeah.
What are your views on this? Not only on the ethnic cleansing, but on people like Pape and Avneri and recently Mr. Finkelstein in the States. Yeah. How do you react to all this, all this garbage about anti-Semitism and so forth and so on? I've got to keep it brief. The lady asked me, so I'd like to hear your answer.
Okay.
Well, I don't know why you call it garbage. I think maybe the charge that they're anti-Semitic is certainly ridiculous. But people like Ilan Pape, like Avi Schleim, like Uri Avneri, These are people who are speaking out. These are people who have the courage of their convictions, who are not easily intimidated and are not silenced. And I think his book on the ethnic cleansing of Palestine is a very courageous book that deals with the issues candidly, with the origins of the Palestinian question, with the tremendous price that the Palestinians paid at the creation of the State of Israel, and the deliberate actually evacuation of Palestine, the intimidation of Palestinians, the expulsion and dispossession of the Palestinians. Ever since the 80s, and the new historians, of course, the real version, the real narrative as to what happened in 1948 and before and after, of course, is coming out, and it's very important. And the more credible these voices are, particularly because they're Jewish and Israeli and so on, the more they will be listened to, and the more they can address courageously issues that have constantly been either censored or suppressed.
Of course, one thing you do have to deal with is the present situation, and there seems to be little movement on that, except that the US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice has actually made a sort of fairly quiet visit across and met with the finance minister. And I wonder, with Salam Fayyad, what significance is there in that? What push do you see from the US?
Well, the thing is, the U.S. so far is still boycotting. It is boycotting Hamas, and it is being very selective about whom to meet in the government. And when Condoleezza Rice met with Salam Fayyad, she met with him in his personal capacity in Washington. When she came to the region, of course, I think she made 7 trips, and the 8th is on the way next month. The U.S., of course, cannot afford to keep its distance, to stay disengaged, so to speak, because, as I said, not only nature, but a conflict hates a vacuum, a political vacuum. So when there is a political vacuum, then violence and extremism will rule the day. You need to be engaged politically. You need to offer a political horizon. And when talking about a political horizon, it's not enough just to express intentions. You have to put together the mechanisms and the time frame and the context for a rapid and decisive negotiating process that would lead to results before there is further deterioration. The two-state solution is still possible. The Americans claim this is their policy, that they're committed to building the Palestinian state. Then they need to do it rapidly before Israel destroys the very foundations of the two-state solution.
How much difference do you see, Dr. Ashrawi, between the way the administration of George W. Bush operates, certainly when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian situation, and that of George Bush's predecessor, Bill Clinton? How much difference do you personally see?
Well, we don't play party politics, but let's say the the previous administration was certainly much more engaged. And this probably led to also a lack of willingness on the part of the Bush administration to be engaged, because they felt that the Clinton administration suffered as a result of the failure to produce results. But again, Clinton got engaged a bit too late, it seems to me, and in ways that did not produce the required results. Now, for the last 7 years, let's say, almost 7 years, the Bush administration stepped back and allowed Israel, gave Israel room and space and time to wreak havoc in the region. And of course, with the debacle in Lebanon and the quagmire of Iraq, certainly the U.S. foreign policy is in deep trouble. So part of extricating themselves from this trouble is to address the region in a more comprehensive and integrated way, and to deal with the core issues. I mean, the neocons and probably the extreme right and so on have led them towards more confrontations, more war, more instability, more violence, rather than conflict resolution. Now, with the, let's say, the Baker-Hamilton study, there is more of a tendency to understand that the region is integrated, that violence and wars aren't going to solve anything, and that the only way to restore the standing and interests of the U.S. is to address the Palestinian question and to bring about a Palestinian-Israeli peace, and hence an Arab-Israeli peace. And there's a clear opportunity with the Arab Initiative.
Well, let's get Steve on the line from Tel Aviv. Steve, thanks for being with us. What would you like to ask?
First of all, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, Steve.
My question is as follows. Lots of Israelis, young Israelis, criticize sometimes actions done by our own government or military. Lots of us also wonder why we don't have the same voices from the Palestinians criticizing missiles and rockets sent over here.
Okay.
I think you do have voices, and we've been speaking out on these issues. We spoke against suicide bombings at that time. We spoke against violence. We spoke against any type of violation of the ceasefire or resorting to violence. That's why I'm saying it has to be delegitimized on all fronts. Yes, and we've been very critical, of course, of all sorts of shortcomings of the Palestinian Authority, despite the fact that they are under occupation and they are severely restricted and curtailed. But there is a very active and critical opposition in Palestine on a variety of issues.
It doesn't make it much to the media, though. I wonder if there's a sense that if it is in the media, or if there's a, if it's very vocal and open, that perhaps it's a disloyalty to the Palestinian cause.
Some people may feel that, but I think if you listen to the Palestinian radio or television, Palestinian broadcasters, they're quite outspoken actually, and extremely critical. I think more than any other I've ever seen, heard. But the thing is, it doesn't make it to the international media because the Palestinian version of reality and the Palestinian narrative right now are not getting into the international media, and they're not getting much attention at all, whether it's critical or whether it's supportive.
With less than 30 seconds to go, about a minute to go, Albert in Oregon on the line. Go ahead, Albert.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, Albert.
I want to say hi to Dr. Ashrawi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you why you haven't run for president of Palestine.
Actually, I'll throw in with that an email question as well. An email question also from Abir in Ramallah, who says, why aren't you as active as you used to be in Ramallah? We don't see you around anymore. So 2 questions for you there.
2 questions. Well, first of all, I am active. The thing is, there are certain restrictions as to my street activism, because I used to be much more visible in demonstrations and protests and so on, and it's become a bit physically more difficult, but I am involved in a variety of issues. And when it comes to running for elections, I ran for the Palestinian Legislative Council. I don't have aspirations to executive office, be it the highest or the or the lowest executive office. I think being free and being part of civil society and being in the legislature, these are things where I can be more effective.
Well, Dr. Ashrawi, thank you very much for talking with us, and good luck with your ventures.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Great to see you, Riz.
On the next show, we speak to a man who's been described as one of the world's greatest living thinkers, Noam Chomsky. Don't forget, you can send your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. And we'll see you next time. Street Talk is coming up next.